Hello and a warm welcome to the India Showcase from Business Today at the India Today Group. This is an evening that we have put together to talk to CEOs, to experts, to understand the India story and showcasing it here on our part, along with our partners, for telling the world about the India story. And joining me now is a guest who knows the macro story of India, as well as so many other elements more than anyone else. Gautam Kumra, Senior Partner and Chair, Asia, ex-China at McKinsey. Welcome, Gautam. Thank you very much for making this time. I want to begin by asking you about India's place in a world which is fragmenting in terms of trade. It's fragmenting in terms of geopolitics. And the new trade order that has been unleashed means two things, perhaps. Might is right, as well as choose your friend and strike a deal.
Well, I wish it was even that simple, because I think friends have turned enemies. So, and you don't also quite know what striking a trade deal means anymore. But let me step back and say that, you see, I think the bigger picture is that we are entering into a new era. I think a lot of people have talked about whether this is the end of globalization. Are we in a fractured world? Perhaps we are entering a new era. You know, the last era over the last 30 years was an era of markets. You know, we had the benefit of low interest rates. We had absolutely a unipolar world. And we had
world awash in liquidity.
Absolutely. And we had global trade. And I think everybody benefited from globalization globally, even though inequality grew. We're now in a new era. It's certainly not a unipolar world. It's becoming bipolar, tripolar, however you want to call it. We certainly are not benefiting from low interest rates, high interest rates, sticky inflation. And we are now seeing the advent of technology. Now, look, as we look at the world in the future, you know, we see two scenarios. You know, either we end up with a more diversified world where trade patterns change, but trade still remains open. Or frankly, we could be in a world that is extremely fragmented and fractured, mostly regionalized, and capital constricts, trade constricts. Now, here's the reality. Global trade, by the way, has continued to grow, about $1 trillion a year. If you look at the next 10 years, about $12 to $14 trillion of trade is going to change kind of its pattern. So in other words, instead of going from A to B, it'll go from A to C. Okay. So 12 to $14 trillion of trade is going to get rewired.
In terms of the flows or the components of trade as well?
Well, certainly the flows, right? And what will happen is Asia, and I'll come to India in a minute, Asia will have some of the safest corridors, which will likely grow and thrive, even if this 12 to $14 trillion of trade gets rewired. So things like India to Southeast Asia, India to Middle East, India to Japan, India to EU. You know, many of these corridors are destined to grow as the world gets more kind of complicated and fragmented. And I think that's partly where the India opportunity lies.
At what stage do you think is it feasible to believe that India will have trade deals with two of the biggest economies, the European Union, one being treated as one economy, we're perhaps days away from it, and President Trump on the sidelines after his speech today here at the World Economic Forum in Davos did seem to drop a hint that the trade deal will come. He spoke about once again about his love for Prime Minister Modi. Does that give you a sense of confidence that these two trade deals could happen soon and kind of change the entire landscape as far as India's trade engagement is concerned with the world?
Look, the reality is trying to predict when anything like that would happen is hard to say. Yeah. I think fundamentally I believe that US and India are two very important players in the new era, and I think certainly there needs to be more collaboration opportunities, and I hope the deal does happen. But irrespective of the deal, you know, we've seen that even when deals have been struck, I think things have changed soon after. You know, tariffs have been slapped, new things have been opened up. So to me, I think two things I would say. Firstly, it is an opportunity for India to certainly build alignment with many new partners. It's not just about EU and US, which are obviously significant, but I would say just a broader open aperture to global engagement and global trade, and building ties like that with many more countries. You know, I mentioned many of them just now. And secondly, look, I think it's also an imperative to now reform more domestically. Because what this crisis is also teaching us is that we need to take the destiny more in our hands and drive the next set of reforms, both at center and state, that will make India's position stronger.
The government of India and many analysts describe 2025 as the year of reforms. whether it was taxation, whether it is the labor market with a new code, multiple other initiatives, nuclear energy, one example. It's a pretty long list. How do you assess the 2025 reform efforts of the union government, and does that set the stage for a stronger performance in 2026?
Look, the reality is for a country of India's size and scale, if you want to continue to grow at about 8% a year, we need 6.5%, 7% of growth through productivity increase. The reality is that to get that level of productivity increase, I think we need reform at scale on a continuous basis, both in center but also in states. Let's not forget that half of the reform we need is now in the ambit of the state governments. So one of the things I'm quite pleased at Davos is to see, many of the state governments kind of reaching out and engaging with business and seeing what they can do to attract more investments. Because the other thing we need is we just need more capital. You see, one of the things that states and India needs to do is to attract more foreign capital back into the country. And reform is needed to truly continue to push, cost of doing business, ease of doing business, predictability of policy, transparency of policy, making it easier to do reform in land and labor. I think these are still big ticket items. So I think 2025 was a good start, right? I mean, building on what has been done in the past, but we need to keep moving on this.
How much of a factor is policy and political certainty? And we have had a lot of that for the past 10, 11 years, and not just at the center, but at states. And if you were to just take India's financial capital as an example, Mumbai, that also has gone very clearly and become like a triple engine, as it is called.
Yes.
Does political and policy stability matter to global investors when they're making a choice to invest in a country like India and obviously in any one state?
I think certainly. I think if you ask me, when you step back and ask people about what are some of the risks they see about India, certainly they would highlight political risk as one. Because stability of leadership absolutely matters. Stability of policy absolutely matters. And I think any about turns and any of that shakes people's confidence. Right? So certainly foreign investors have choices across countries, choices across states within a country like India. And I think what you just raised is vital.
Given your overseeing Asia, if you look at it in terms of the near South Asia footprint around India, over the past few years, we have seen a lot of turmoil in countries, including Bangladesh, for example, which as a country did pretty reasonably well on textile exports as an example, yet political instability has cast a shadow on that. If you were to juxtapose it, the size of the economies is not comparable. What stands out as far as India is concerned, Gautam?
You see, what stands out is if you more broaden it to Southeast Asian economies, right? You look at the Southeast Asian tigers and you look at Southeast Asia as an economy, that's, by the way, comparable in size to India. About 3.5, 4 trillion, something like that. And by the way, has had reasonable growth as a category. But there's no any one country that matches India in terms of sheer population, scale of opportunity, and kind of the breadth of what's possible, right? Those economies tend to be more volatile. One of the benefits of, if you look at India over the last 20, 25 years, we've delivered more or less 7% growth, plus minus some, right? So very hard to find an economy of that size. The other reality is that they have been much more export-oriented economies. India has been much more of a domestic consumption-driven economy. So I would say that's a fundamental difference.
Looking ahead and assuming that the big ticket trade deals of the United States and the European Union and several others that are being negotiating, I, as a reporter who started on the trade beat many, many years ago, can't recall a time where you had more than a dozen and a half parallel trade negotiations happening at the same time, and most of them with a sense of urgency, which is understandable. What would that mean for our export competitiveness? Because on the other hand, the way exports used to happen over the past 3 decades, that has now fundamentally changed.
That is correct. Look, I'm still optimistic. I go back to what I said earlier. See, trade in products, I just mentioned it, that is growing at about $1 trillion a year. And I don't think it's about to stop. The trade is going to continue to grow. It's going to get reorganized. It's going to get rewired. It's going to get redistributed. When there is changes like that, I think market shares shift. Look at China. China's export to the US has gone down by 29% this year. China's export to the US has gone down by 29% this year. China's export to Africa has gone up by 23% this year.
Their exports to India are also.
So look at it. Overall, China has now hit up more than $1 trillion trade surplus. Now that's what I mean by realigning trade. So I think for India, the opportunity is up for grabs. It's a question of becoming more externally competitive. I think exactly to your point, because we're not the only country that is trying to tap into it. You mentioned Southeast Asia, economies like Vietnam and so forth are equally trying to participate in this rewiring of trade.
Gautam, many years ago, many years ago, I worked on a story about India's GDP in US dollar relative terms. And the lesson that I learned, which perhaps is forgotten by many people today, is not to take a spot exchange rate, which someone else had done, but to take an aggregate rate. But in terms of the economic size of India, there are various experts, and the government also keeps talking about and believing in the third largest economy very soon. Where do you stand on that? How important is that relative ranking for at least the state of mind of our growth, Gautam?
Yeah, look, I think that is destined to happen. I think the fact that India will be the third largest economy in the world is destined to happen. Just looking at fundamental demographics that are in India's favor. You see, one thing that excites me is just the demographics. Of course, we need to create enough jobs for this emerging population. But when I spend a lot of time in Japan and Korea, and a little bit in China, and I think these are all countries that are struggling now with declining working populations. So they have a very stiff challenge ahead of them to drive productivity growth, to drive economic growth. India still has a massive tailwind. India is the only country, other than maybe the continent of Africa, that will continue to see increase in working population till about 2050. So frankly, we are uniquely positioned. Even China, by the way, you look at the age of population under 25 in China, is dramatically reducing in the next 20 years. So for us, it's an opportunity and a challenge. Right, but that keeps me excited. Given the consumer, market in India, given what's happening with digitization, given the access to engineering skills, India is destined to be number 3. To me, that's not the debate anymore. I think whether it happens in 2 years, 5 years, fine, but that's not the debate. The issue is more, how do we certainly punch above our weight, in what's happening in the world, trade, AI, and lift everybody faster.
I want to frame a question on AI, but from the perspective of the United States, where some observers have said that if you were to look at the impact that the tariffs have had, the US economy would have suffered. But on account of the AI boom, everything is pretty decently placed as far as the US economy is concerned, and some macro headline numbers. For India, what role going forward does AI, is it likely to have? Is it more of a challenge or an opportunity, particularly from the demographic and the need to create jobs perspective?
Right. I think you rightly said, you look at the US, part of the reason why the economy is held up and the markets have held up is because there is a lot of excitement about what AI can do. In fact, more than 50% of US real GDP growth in the recent past can be explained only by construction in data centers. Construction in data centers.
More than half
of the US recent real GDP growth rate can be explained by just the construction in data centers. So that tells you the power of what's happening. You see, because the amount of investment that's going into just data centers is expected to be about 1% of GDP globally, about $1 trillion a year. So big point is, yes, AI will be a big boost, which is why the economy in markets like the US and markets have done well. Now, in India, I think we are in a very different place. We are an emerging market with much lower per capita, services-dependent economy. How we use AI, I think, will likely be very different from OECD markets because our cost and capital trade-off is different. I think to me, in markets like India, AI can also be a powerful tool to open up new markets for products and services that was not conceivable in the past. So we have to think about revenue growth in addition to productivity and cost improvement opportunities. We have to think about solving fundamental problems in India using AI and technology that add to productivity and add to growth.
Gautam, is it possible that Indian companies who deploy AI at scale would perhaps see higher productivity gains versus American companies? Because that's a debate that is currently underway.
Well, the reality is that India's, if you look at labor productivity in compared to the Western standards, is obviously low. Right? Part of the thing we benefited from is low cost of labor. So we have a labor arbitrage, we have low productivity, but overall we become competitive. I think to me AI is an opportunity to lift the level of productivity up. right? Lift that level of productivity up. Now, frankly, that does mean that there will be displacement of jobs, there will be reskilling needed. And the reality is, in the future, those who learn how to work with AI will do better than those who struggle.
I thank you, Gautam,
Okay, thank
to
you.
talk about the India story. Thanks
you very
very
much.
much.